Hi, I'm Jan Broberg, your host and fellow survivor. Welcome to Trauma Interrupted. On this show, we name the wounds that trauma and abuse leave behind. We do the work it takes to heal, and together, we find the way forward. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get to work. At one point, Anna Lopez escaped an abusive marriage with almost nothing. Just a passport that she hadn't been allowed to hold for 6 years, a small amount of hidden cash, and a plan so dangerous that if it failed, she wasn't really sure what would happen next. But this story isn't really about the day she escaped. It's about everything that came before it. Anna grew up witnessing domestic violence as a child. She learned to survive by staying quiet and staying small and putting everyone else's safety before her own. Those survival skills carried her into an abusive marriage where coercive control, financial abuse, even digital surveillance and spiritual manipulation, and terrible fear slowly became her normal. For years after leaving, she thought she was simply anxious and depressed. But what she eventually discovered was something many survivors know all too well. Trauma doesn't end when the abuse ends. Today, Anna is a trauma recovery coach, founder of the Brave and Free community, and a voice helping survivors understand that healing isn't about becoming who you were before. Sometimes it's about discovering who you were meant to be all along. This conversation is honest, hopeful, and deeply human. Welcome to Trauma Interrupted. Let's get to work. I am thrilled today because I have Anna Lopez. Anna Lopez is a domestic violence survivor, and she is a beautiful human. I can feel it. I can sense it. I can see it. Her trauma recovery and her post-traumatic coaching is some of the best stuff that I've really seen around. And she founded Brave and Free, which is a global online community supporting survivors of domestic abuse and complex trauma. Welcome to the show, Anna.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jan. It is such an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you. We love talking with people who have been through the nitty-gritty. You escaped a very violent and coercively abusive marriage. How do you think you got into that marriage? Can you go back in time for us and let's catch up to where you are today?
Right. So for me, it all started when I was a child. And I think a lot of survivors would sort of relate to that. And I grew up as an only child. My dad was an alcoholic. It was his coping mechanism for his own trauma. And when he was under the influence, he would be an extremely violent person. And so I ended up witnessing domestic violence at home. So I got to see my mom being abused. And that sort of set the stage for me. You know, as a child, I sort of kind of like caved in and I became this very quiet person. I just couldn't trust the world. I was always so afraid. And kind of like, I'd have this routine where I'd go to school, come back home, and I had everything like planned out. I'm like, okay, from this time to this time, I'm going to be doing this because when the clock hits 9 p.m., I know what's going to happen at home. And that's when I run into my room. I'm under the sheets. I have my headphones on and some music. So to keep the loud, noises and violence at bay. But there were times where I had to face it and I had to see what was happening. I had to hear it. And a lot of the times I was the parentified child who was, going and rescuing my mom from what was happening. So really that was what childhood was. Kind of go to school with this solemn face. I wouldn't have a lot of emotions. I remember this girl once saying to me, Anna, when you talk to you, it's like we're talking to a wall. And what
Mm,
she meant by that was that I was just so emotionless that everything that was happening at home was just all sort of suppressed and inside because I didn't want to show the world what was happening for fear of being judged.
mm,
But at the same time, I think once I came into school, I just kind of like shut down.
mm,
So that was kind of like what childhood was like. And then of course, going into the teenage years and then kind of looking for that love and affection in all the wrong places because all the wrong places felt so familiar, the inconsistency, the violence and everything felt so, so familiar that that's what I ended up kind of like going towards. Yeah.
So, when you think about being parentified, as you said, and you were trying to be the parent and rescue your mother,
Yeah.
what sorts of things did you try to do? I'm just curious to see the parallels that I'm sure others might see in their own life. What were some of those actions that you took?
Well, for one, there was a lot of pressure on me to convince my dad to stop drinking, to think
Mm,
that if I, as the daughter, were to go and speak to him and tell him, you know, please don't do this, that he would stop. So there was a lot of pressure. And I would at times just go towards him and I'd freeze because those words just wouldn't come out of my mouth. And I felt this intense fear that
mm,
I don't know, like this is the man that I see in this state, and you are expecting me, a child, to stand in front of him and convince him to not drink anymore. And it was just terrifying for me. So that was definitely one of the things that was expected of me and that I attempted to do, but I don't think it was easy to do. And I don't think I actually came to a point where I was able to say those words. But there were other instances where my mom would call out for me, like when she was being battered. In the middle of the night, she'd scream my name,
mm,
and I would just get out of bed and go to her and just stand there. I couldn't do anything because I just didn't know what to do. But all I could do was just show up there and just stand there. And then when my dad would see me, he'd stop.
mm,
These were two things that I would like remember very clearly. And of course, like picking up the phone, my mom telling me, can you call this friend to let them know that, I'm not okay? And I just pick up the phone and I'd call them and be like, this is what's happening. And just trying to pass on messages to people that things were just not okay at home, like things were going down. So yeah, these were some of the things that I had to do.
and what were the ages, would you say, when you were doing those things? You must have been witnessing this as a very young child and then
Yeah.
trying to mitigate this terrible trauma that your mother, this violence that she was going through.
I think it was definitely around 6 years onwards. Like, I mean, I remember my dad drinking since I was almost 3, but the times I was picking up the phone was starting at around 6, and it went on
Mhm.
till maybe around 7, 8 years old that I would do that.
So, what did anybody come? Did anybody help? What happened? Were people too
Uh,
afraid? What? They didn't believe?
People would come perhaps the next day, not in that moment,
Ugh.
but they'd come the next day and they'd just have a conversation, and that conversation would die down and the entire thing would just repeat itself. People attempted to help in their own way, and in that way was perhaps to counsel the person rather than have a conversation with my mom that is, you don't have to be in this situation if it's unsafe for you and your daughter, but more so looking and treating it as if it were a marital issue that could be fixed, like normal circumstances could be resolved.
Mm.
So that was kind of the help or support that my mom was getting, more along the lines of counseling her and trying to talk to my dad about not drinking. And of course, in front of them, he'd say, yeah, okay. But by the time it was the end of the night, it was a whole different story altogether. Yeah.
Right. So as you're moving from this, young childhood, and you said you're moving into your those, early tween
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Um, you've been already set up in what I would call survival mode and trauma
Mhm.
brain. That's
Yeah.
already who you are. That's everything that you can do, which also affected school,
Mhm.
and how you acted there. And yet people not maybe knowing the signs, not really knowing what to do. Did your mother, was she ever able to leave, or did she continue in that relationship?
She never left. She
Oh.
continued on. Um, and that was really heartbreaking for me, of course, to
Mhm.
to have to see her go through that, but to also live through that because it impacted me massively in so many ways, whether it was just feeling neglected, unloved, um, feeling like I was just living in a war zone and just felt so helpless. Like there was just no way out of the situation.
So
Yeah.
you said you started looking for love in all the wrong places because you're not experiencing what you needed, obviously, in your home, and not a lot of closeness with your father, I'm assuming.
Yes.
So scared and under the sheets, and it's all transferred to you. It's as if you experienced domestic violence. Don't you?
Mhm. I agree. I absolutely agree.
So what did you do to try and find, you know, a way out? A way out, at least emotionally?
Um, so some of the things that I was doing was really just trying to lean on the people who were around me. And growing up as an only child, both my mom and dad did a 9 to 5 job. And they ended up trusting a friend of the family, someone who was in our building. And I just started spending like time with this man who was much older than me just because he was around, and just sort of befriending him and him just keeping me company until one day I could see that the intention was very ulterior. And I was
Mm.
put in a situation where he was basically trying to molest me and take advantage of me, this little girl who he probably thought didn't understand anything. And so trying to take advantage of me in that way. And that was, I guess, my first experience of being in a situation where I'm trying to lean on somebody for support who's around, but I'm taken advantage of. And I remember telling my mom and dad about it because it went on for a couple of years and it kept escalating to
Mhm.
the point where I felt that if I hadn't probably taken the step of like picking up the phone one day and threatening to call my mom, it would have possibly ended in rape. And I remember when I told them, they confronted him and he said, well, she's a small kid. I think she has misunderstood what happened. I was just kind of like changing into my clothes, into another pair of clothes. And I think she misunderstood what was happening there. And they basically never believed me. And the conversation never, ever happened again. So I went out of that situation thinking, okay, well, no one believes me. There's no point talking about anything. Um, if something happens to me, whether I feel ignored, I feel neglected, I am being taken advantage of, there's no point talking to my parents about it because they're just not going to believe me. And so then I kind of like went on into other relationships as I grew up. And I just found myself in these relationships that were kind of volatile and just not good for me. Like I would always find myself in those dynamics where I was being harmed, whether that was, and at that point, it may have been more of this psychological harm, this emotional harm, rather than anything physical, but always jumping from relationship to relationship in tears, not
Mhm.
feeling that I was loved enough, and just not being able to find that space and that person who could truly understand where I was coming from and what I was going through.
So basically, as we know, as survivors of childhood trauma and sexual molestation is what sounds like was happening for
Yeah.
you. And this is all preteen. I mean, before the age of 13, you've already been set on a course, correct?
Yes.
And so when you're looking, it's interesting how we must somehow, I don't know what this is, but there's something like, do we have a light going on that says, come over here and assault me or take advantage of me? There's something about the shame that gets lodged in us feeling shame, in us feeling like we're guilty somehow, in us being smaller to try and hide. All those things
Mhm.
almost open the door to more abuse, to more
Yeah.
abusive people walking
Yeah.
through to take advantage. So you got married pretty young,
Mhm. I did.
age
I got
19.
married at that's right, age 19.
Yeah, and I read that in your bio and I was like, "Oh my
Mhm.
word, she's young."
Yes.
So tell me if there's any clues that someone else who maybe has experienced such a childhood,
Mhm.
such trauma, might just take one nugget from here to say, "Oh my goodness, what am I doing? Is this person actually going to be good to me, good for me? Are we a good match?" What
Mhm.
stop somebody because it's so hard when you're in the middle of it looking for acceptance and love. It's very hard to see the warning signs.
Yeah, yeah. I think I would say is that to check in with yourself and see how you feel around that person. I think a lot of the times because we've grown up in that um, through the childhood abuse, we tend to not check in with ourselves when we're just in the survival mode and we're just like, okay, how do I survive? How do I get the love that I need? And forget to look within ourselves. And sometimes our gut, our intuition is screaming. We can have tears like running down our face, but we will ignore that. And all we can hear is, I need love and I need to go towards this person because this person is showing me some sort of love. They're giving me breadcrumbs. And at that point, we don't know it's breadcrumbs. We think it's the cake, right? Because we compare it to what we haven't had. And
Mhm.
so if I could say anything to anyone at that point is that just take a moment to look at how it is impacting you because as much as you want to go into that relationship and you want to be loved, there's this yearning for this potential. But what
Mhm.
is happening to you inside? Like, are you truly happy? Do you have these question marks, you know, that's like, hey, something's not okay here, or why am I not able to voice out my opinion without
Mhm.
um, you know, getting shut down by this person? Or why am I crying all the time? Or why am I in distress all the time, even though I feel love, but there's also this distress. And I
Mhm.
think when we take a moment to just sit with those, even those two truths, there's something there um, that's telling us something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the idea that people should not be happy with crumbs. I
Yeah.
think that if we could get that little message out, that could so many people. Am I just being satisfied with crumbs? Because we're getting some sort of attention and love, even if it's very short lived and it's just moments. and in between, it's all this violence, because
Yeah.
it was for you in this, I'm assuming this is the one relationship that encompassed sort of everything. It was domestic
Yes.
violence, it was physical, it was sexual,
Yes.
emotional. What other kinds of abuses were you suffering in this relationship so that people can see it? So a lot of people understand physical abuse. They can see it. Okay, we
Hmm.
know that's domestic violence and it has the word violence. So we always think of that. But that is not the only kind of violence. Tell us the
Yeah.
other ones that aren't as obvious.
Um, One was, and the big one was definitely coercive control. And that was something that was from the very beginning. Of course, this person was very charismatic. Initially, there was a lot of what we call love bombing, where they're just trying to, shower you with these compliments and these gifts and everything, but with this intention of trying to manipulate you and trying to like get you um, trapped in their arms and their so-called affection.
Yeah.
So that was basically how it started, and then slowly, gradually, it went into this, discrete kind of manipulation and coercive control, and some of it included telling me how to dress, what to wear, how much makeup I should put on, what kind of shoes I could wear or not wear, who are the friends who I could speak to, and basically kind of packaging it in a way of like, well, you know, your friends are not good for you,
Mm.
and you need to turn into this on a new leaf, and your parents are not good for you. Your dad's an alcoholic, so you shouldn't be spending time with them. So he packaged it in a way that at that point would somehow feel like it was making some sort of sense,
Mm.
and not really realizing that, oh, this person is doing all of this to sort of trap me and get more control, you know,
Mhm.
control over me. Like you think he might tell you, well, don't wear this, and then come with another pair of clothes that's two sizes bigger. And then you're confused because you're like, well, this guy got me something to wear. That's so kind of him. But at the same time, that's his way of controlling you into getting you to be the way he wants you to be. So coercive control was a big piece. For me, even like not continuing my education, he'd be like, well, why do you need to continue your education, or why do you need to work? Like, you're sorted. I've got you, and I'm going to support you. And you think that, yeah, that makes sense. Why do I need to work if I have a husband to support me? But these are all these little things that are actually big things that kind of take away your agency and your sense of, your autonomy, because at some point then you're completely dependent on this person, and you don't realize it until you've reached this point. You're like, holy crap, like, I don't work, I don't do this, I don't do that, when did this all happen? It apparently happened very gradually, over time. So coercive control, big one. And the second one was financial abuse, which again was tied to convincing me not to work. I didn't even have my own bank account. So
Mm.
whatever funds that were coming in were through him, and I would get like little something to spend on myself. At some point, my mom gave me yeah, crumbs. My mom gave me a supplementary credit card that I'd use. So it was really terrible. Some of the things that were happening. And of course, there was also digital abuse. So being monitored, like my online movements were being monitored. So he'd be checking out what websites I was visiting, who I was emailing, who I was texting. Like he had spyware installed on my laptop.
Wow.
So he was just trying to have that sense of control in every aspect that he possibly could. And I think the last one that I just want to mention and tap on is, you mentioned sexual abuse. And, a lot of women wonder, well, is it sexual abuse because it's in marriage? But there are so many pieces to that, like reproductive coercion, where in my case, the sex was more of a punishment or a means of entrapping me by trying to impregnate me. So he basically wanted to get me pregnant so that I would be trapped in the marriage and that it would be more difficult for me to get out of it.
Mm.
So these are all very real things that a lot of people go through, but perhaps they don't understand that it's actually abuse.
Isn't that interesting that the whole thing is to trap you and make sure that you know that you can't go out on your own? It's that
Well,
it's everything that takes away autonomy is literally a form of grooming, grooming you to be dependent, grooming you to not have any confidence. There's a bunch of grooming that a lot of times we only think of grooming before the abuse starts, but there is grooming inside of an abusive relationship that continues to question your abilities, to say, oh, I wouldn't be able to make a living. I can't leave. What would I do? Reproductive abuse is a really interesting one that you've brought up here because a lot of times that becomes the, the juggernaut where,
yep,
oh, now I've got her,
yeah,
because now we have a child, no matter what, even if she were to
yes,
leave, I'm going to have either my child, I'm going to make sure I have the child, or I'm going to be able to visit, or they have this thing that keeps them connected now to you.
hmm,
Um, that's really good. And digital abuse is something we haven't really talked about very much. And I think that's very important too, because now we have all kinds of ways to monitor people. It's like nothing we
yeah,
say is private. Nothing we do is, you know, hardly anything can be kept a secret if somebody
mhm,
really wants to find out, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and not that you were trying to keep secrets, it's just trying to have your own friends and your own communication and what you wanted to look at and study and think about,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, should be, yours. But boy, this digital age is really different. Now,
it
one that you
is.
mentioned, but you had said something about it in your notes that you sent me was about spiritual abuse.
So for me, the spiritual abuse was another big piece because my ex-husband was actually a pastor. So, it was everything, and that's what it was packaged in, a lot of scripture being used to control again, and to justify some of the actions that, he was taking and some of the behaviors, sort of camouflaging it in, well, this is what the Bible says, or this is what God says, and making it very confusing. And
Mhm.
also the fact that kind of using his position and his power and his authority to fool people, to be very charismatic in front of people and make them feel like he is this kind soul, that he is this person who wants to help people and the youth. But behind closed doors, he's this completely different person. And then this inability to question him, this inability to go to people in the church and say, well, this is what's happening to me. And them just shoving scriptures down your throat and saying, well, we can help you this way. That is, we can go and ask him if he's abusing you. And I'm just like, no, you cannot do that because he's going to abuse me all the more. But they still do that because that's what they think is the right way to do according to, um, you know, religion. And they they basically do not want to separate what man put together. So there were just a lot of this happening and people sort of praying and expecting that this this wife would somehow find a way to submit to this husband or not provoke him because it was so easy to believe that I was the problem versus a man who is a pastor, who has a title, who, gets to portray himself as somebody at the podium. A lot of use of God and the Bible and the scripture to manipulate the entire situation and keep me trapped in there and say that, well, this isn't, you can't do this because this is against the word of God and this is sinful. Yeah.
Yeah, I really love that you are so open and honest in sharing details because that really matters. People will see it better coming from somebody else than they can see it in their own relationship until they hear it. And then they'll
Yeah.
go, "Oh my gosh, this is happening to me."
Yeah.
Because that patriarchal, the man is the leader, the woman submits to their man and the man submits to God or whatever. It's kind of that chain of patriarchy that
Yeah.
that maybe if it's a really good man, maybe that works out for a few people, but most of the time, I I really believe that we should be on equal ground. We need to see ourselves as complete equals in speaking with, God or whatever your form of spirituality might be, that we have that right, that ability. We know something's wrong, get out, go. And
Yeah.
somewhere in if you have a faith-based life, if you do, there will be a net, there will be somebody to catch you, to help you, because I think people are so scared of how they will survive, but you will. You can.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
want people to know that because you even watched him grooming a minor. Do you think
Yes.
he was going to abuse this minor?
At the time, initially, I didn't think that, but obviously, as he was grooming her, he was also abusing her because he was taking advantage of her vulnerability. He knew that she was a child without a mom, and he knew what needs she had. He tried to use her to even, keep an eye out on me, gave her this like little this project where he made her feel important, but at the same time, he would do that in exchange for things. And then gradually, he was teaching her even how to look into her own sexuality. And he kind of taught her what was okay, what was not, whether that was showing her pornography or, you know, asking her to do things to him. And at that point of time, because he's the person who's educating her, aka grooming her, that's what she's picking up on as, and she's like, well, I guess this is normal, or this is okay. And she did it, and she did it for a very, very long time. um and obviously that would have been so ingrained in her and so hard to break out of, but she was definitely groomed, she was used and abused, and watching that was incredibly heartbreaking because at the
Mm.
same time I couldn't do anything. I was fighting for myself, and to fight against her or to fight for her would be like, well, now you're just crazy because now you think I'm abusing you and I'm abusing another person, when you can ask her and she's never going to admit that I've done anything to her because she's groomed. She's just going to stand by him, which is what she did for the longest time.
So when you finally escaped this marriage, um, what I understand was your passport was under lock and key, but that is
Yes.
exactly what you somehow got and the only thing you had when you
Hmm.
left. Tell us about.
Yes. I didn't have my passport for all those 6 years. It was kept in my ex husband's father's study. And we still live together. So we lived with his parents. So it came a point where we had to go to a conference in the US. And um, you know, I didn't have a visa. I didn't have a visit visa to get to the US, but my ex-husband did. And so he was like, well, we need to go, apply for a visa for you. And so I got the appointment sorted. And funny enough, it seemed like he didn't really want me to go with him on this trip because he never provided me with any of the documentation that I would need to get my visa approved, like financials and things like that. So he just gave me his passport, I remember, and he said, well, we'll tell the lady that your husband has a visa to the States, and I think that should sort it out. And in my head, I was like, no, it's not. But of course, at that point, I didn't fight back. I was like, yeah, okay. And so I went. the visa got rejected. Lady she's really mad. I guess she was like, "Are you stupid? Like, what were you thinking before you came here?" And and so I went back home and I was like, "Well, yeah, it's rejected." And his family was really, really mad, and they were like, "What were you thinking? Like, how could you go without any of the documentation?" And they were like, "Reapply for it." So this time when I went to apply for the visa, there was a date that was like 3 or 4 days ahead. I didn't pick that date. I ended up picking a date that was 2 weeks from then. And I said to myself, well, let me see if this buys me time. And during those 2 weeks, they forgot to ask me for my passport back. So it was with me. And I had been hiding a little money that I would get perhaps on my birthday or for for various reasons, like hundreds of what we call dirhams here in the UAE. And so I'd hide that under my bed, and I collected about 5,000 dirhams over 6 years, which isn't much. And so I ended up contacting a friend who was basically to me an angel in disguise who came into the church and was a domestic violence survivor herself. And I said to her, I've got my passport. Maybe this is the moment for me to leave. And I'm like, but I don't know how to do this. I'm scared. I don't know where I'm going to go. Can you please help me out? And so she started to think of what are the different things that I could do, who I could reach out to. I was scared to go to the police because I thought they'd send me back. I didn't know what my rights were. I thought they'd believe him and not me. Um, I just, I, I just didn't trust in reaching out to the authorities. And there was no going back home because my mom at the time wasn't very supportive. Her take was that you've got to fix this. Um, she expected me to take on the footsteps that she took, which was to stay in the marriage. So there was no support from her. The church wasn't supporting me. They were, in fact, praying that somehow this marriage would magically work out. And so the next step was, okay, let's find a nonprofit or a shelter, even if it's in another country, to see if they could help you out. And so my friend got in touch with a couple of nonprofits that were based in India. And one of them responded and said to her, well, if Anna can make her way here, we will support her. And they never kind of defined what that support would be. But she just took that as a positive sign. And she said, well, let's do this. And I was like, okay. At that point of time, I was like, I don't care. You could take me and tell me to sleep on the streets, and I will do it if that's what freedom looks like. Anything but continuing on here. And so I told her, I said, here's the money. I would keep transferring like some of my documents to her. She'd
Mm.
come pretending like she was working for my place, and I'd like slowly sneak in like um some documents or some clothes. And then finally she was like, well, okay, well, I've booked your ticket for so and so specific date, and you are going to leave. And I was like, okay. And um and so she was so kind enough to kind of go with some common friends, and they timed how long it would take from the house to the airport to see how much time I had before my ex-husband would actually find out that I'd gone missing. And so the day had come, and it was a Friday. It's a day that, in the UAE at that time was the holiday, the Sunday of the US. And
Okay.
that's when we go to church. And I was trying to fake that I was sick, but he wouldn't buy it. And he's like, no, I don't care if you're sick, you're coming to church.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, okay. And I, texted my friend and I said, well, he's not buying it. I have to go to church. So she's like, okay, well, you're going to the airport from church. And so I put my passport inside my pant, and I just took my bag, went to church. And at some point, it was like she told me at this specific time, just come to the back and there'll be a car waiting for you, like, and they'll take you to the airport. And I was like, okay. And so we were waiting, looking at the time, and suddenly my ex-husband goes missing. Like, he's nowhere to be found. At that point, I had anticipated he would be at the podium, making the opening remarks at the beginning of the service, but he wasn't there. About 5 minutes, 10 minutes passed, and I was like, oh my God, I'm running out of time. And so um, I just didn't know what to do. And I took my chances. I pretended like I was going to the restroom, and I went out. I didn't see him. I ran out the back. I got into the car. I got
Oh,
driven to the airport, and I was screaming things in the car that I cannot remember, but I was in a state of shock and fear. I just gave my phone to my friend, and I was like, okay, they dropped me. I kept looking behind. Every time, every step I took in the airport, like I got to immigration, I got to the boarding gate, I just kept looking at. I'm like, he's gonna come. He's coming now. Like, there is no way in hell that he hasn't figured out that I am at the airport. So, to my luck, or my may I say fortune, he he didn't get there on time, or he didn't even think that I would take such steps to get to an airport, like buy a ticket, get to an airport, flee the country. But I got on that flight, and I escaped. Yeah.
oh, that just brings like I want to cry, I want to cheer, I want to hug you. I mean, that's amazing. The courage. No wonders you started an online community called Brave and Free that is helping others. And we're going to talk about that. You actually are a hero, and you have been honored as a woman of substance by SRL Diagnostics. You received the 2024 Mental Award for Mental Health Hero, Overcoming Barriers to Succeed. Talk about barriers to succeed. And your story has been featured by the BBC, Gulf News. I don't know how to say that other name. Is
That's
that
okay.
Khaleej? How do you say that?
That's Khaleej Chimes. So that's one of the papers here in Dubai.
Okay. Because we're speaking to you from Dubai, which is so incredible. And then the Feminina magazine. And you've been on the Sick Boy podcast and many others, and now mine. And I feel really, really a beautiful bond with you of, yay, good for you, Anna, good for you. And so now, please tell me what brought you into your 10 years of trauma recovery, and how did you get to the point that you are now? Let's just start with one little piece at a time. You escaped, you went somewhere. Did you go to the States first, or did you go to where you are in Dubai now?
So I ended up going to the nonprofit was based in India. And so
Oh, India.
I lived there for
Oh,
about 3.5 years. I worked for the nonprofit. Initially when I got out, all I could do was cry because there was this sense of relief, but also this sense of fear of the unknown and just not knowing, well, what's going to happen next? How am I going to survive? Because I had no money, and the nonprofit said, well, we could pay a little money, which was just enough to like cover my rent. But I just said, no, it's fine. I'll do it. But as I started working, and starting to live life, I realized how terrified I was. It was as if, I was blind for 6 years, and suddenly someone just kind of like switched on this torch light and was really bright in my eyes. And I'm like, this,
spotlight.
yeah,
Brr, this is actual reality here.
yeah. So it's
Ah,
like, I'm like, decisions? How do I make decisions? How do I open a bank account? How do I work a 9 to 5 job? Like, things that people were probably doing. I was so scared, and I was just like, I don't know how to do this thing called life. Please, somebody show me how. And I was almost ashamed of like not knowing, but also so stressed from, there was a chronic stress from the abuse, and then there was this chronic stress from surviving after the abuse.
Mhm.
Um, and then finally, I just realized I started getting nightmares. I started having these flashbacks, even emotional flashbacks. I started being very hyper vigilant. I would keep looking behind me. I'm like, someone's coming to take me, or I would feel like people were conspiring against me. So, all of these at that time to me was like weird things are happening to me that I couldn't understand. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, what is happening to me? And finally, I said, I need to get help because I cannot live like this. I cannot go into work thinking people are conspiring against me, or that I have to finish a task perfectly, so much so that I'm like anxious as hell, that my 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 body's like, it's danger. If you don't do this perfectly, you're going to be in danger. And it was all of the things from the abuse that was, making me feel this way. And so finally I went to a
I
therapist.
call that trauma brain. That's
Yeah,
trauma brain. The trauma
absolutely.
brain is in charge now, and you don't know how to get out of it. You don't
Yeah,
even know that there's a word for it, or that you can. I mean,
yeah,
all of that trauma for such an extended period of time from your earliest childhood
yeah.
through this, what are you, 25 now? That's complex PTSD.
So I went to a therapist. Therapy wasn't enough. At that point of time, it was, mostly talk therapy. I don't think the therapist was even familiar with what complex PTSD was. Um, and then finally, I went to a psychiatrist because I needed medication because my symptoms were just not going away. And of course, they weren't going away. Um, and so I've been on medication for over a decade. And I went from therapist to therapist, and everybody just kept telling me, well, you know, yeah, there's a lot of trauma, but that you're depressed and you're anxious. And nobody ever told me that it was complex PTSD. There was just one GP who actually scribbled on a prescription paper, and he just put PTSD, circled it, and he sent me off. And I'm like, what the hell is PTSD? Um, no education given on anything. And so for the longest time, I just believed that I was depressed and anxious. And of course I was, but that was just a symptom of
Yeah.
complex PTSD. And so it took me almost 10 years to come to a space where, after a lot of therapy, I finally got into specialized trauma therapy. So I've done a lot of EMDR, and other forms of trauma therapy that really made me was it gave me the tools to sort of not just process what had happened, but also to kind of like, when things happen now, when I have my trauma responses, well, these are the tools that I have to help regulate my body, to help, tell myself it's okay, to sort of change what my day is looking like according to how my nervous system feels, and not make me feel like I am this person with something fundamentally wrong, with myself. So there was a lot of self-compassion. There was a lot of understanding why certain things happen, and trying to also deal with some of the coping mechanisms that I had back then that I was still, dealing with now. So I brought all those survival mechanisms, obviously, into my current life. So if at the point I was pleasing and appeasing my abuser, I was doing that now with everybody around me. If at that point I would lie to him to protect myself, I was still continuing to lie now. So all of those survival mechanisms were like screaming. That's how I was surviving in this world, but it was no longer serving me. And I got judged for it a lot. I got, um, you know, not everybody understands that those are trauma responses. They just look at it face value and they're like, well, I don't know if you're a trustworthy person.
Mm.
Or I don't know if like something's wrong with you. Like, why do you do this and why do you do that? When all you're trying to do is survive and protect yourself, and just your body and your nervous system still thinks that, if something goes wrong, then I am going to be at the receiving end. And that's all we know. So I had to work through all of that. And I still am working through it
Of
to,
course.
to just sort of like shift and unlearn certain things slowly but surely, and tell
Hmm.
myself, it's okay now, Anna. Like, you are in a better place. And if you say no, you're not going to be abused or be abused or be punished for it. If you tell the truth, it's going to be okay. So I have to keep relearning this, and just sort of, practicing this every day of my life to
Hmm.
help my brain understand and rewire itself to see this as, it's not unsafe. It's not dangerous anymore. You can do this. Yeah.
And really, that is self-talk, self-compassion, to talk yourself through it now and to not let yourself, stay there. Even if you go there for a moment, you're self-soothing, you're telling your nervous system, your vagus nerve, you're doing things that help your brain repattern. And that,
Yes.
it's a huge amount of identity that you did not have that you
Yes.
now have to gain. What is
Yes.
your identity? It's a
Yes.
huge loss of
Yes.
identity for all those years. And now you
Absolutely.
left it, but now what's your identity? People can't just switch the light. Here's the light, and you are like naked in front of it going, who am I now? What is identity, right?
Yes. Yes. And a lot of people think, well, can't you just go back to the person you were? Like, and I'm like, well, for some of us, we don't know who that person was. Was there ever a before? Like, especially if abuse started in childhood, there was no before. So you basically just discovering yourself and who you are now and who you're becoming.
Hmm.
You have nothing to kind of like lean back on or look back on.
And it's interesting too because you also, like me, we the way that we continued in our trauma response was to try to please and make everything perfect. I did that same thing. There wasn't At the time, I knew fight, flight, or freeze. I knew those. I didn't know fawning. I didn't know fawn. Fawning means to please, to make everybody else happy so that nothing bad can happen to you and to be perfect
Exactly.
because then everything will be okay. That
Yeah.
fawning is exactly the word that I needed when I finally heard it for the first time. This is just like in recent years. And I went, what? That was me. you know,
Mhm.
Helps when you can identify something with words. There were a
Yeah.
lot of things that I would read, just about overcoming fear, for example. Well, it wasn't the same kind of overcoming fear as sexual assault and abuse and being brainwashed and kidnapped. It was a different take on fear, but it helped me try to understand why do I keep checking the back seat? Why do I look under the car? I'm in
Yeah.
my 30s now. I don't need to do that. And
Yeah.
telling yourself you don't need to do that. You're okay. You're safe. So interesting that you founded this online community, this space, brave and free.
Yeah.
You're so brave and you are finding freedom, as am
Mhm.
I. And,
Yes.
you know, these are the things that we want to be the peer to peer support for those and for what wasn't there for us.
Yes. Yes.
So tell me more
Absolutely.
about that and how's that going and how did you start it and what's happening now with that?
I started Brave and Free in 2020. I think it was during the COVID times. And really, it was a way for me to just sort of express myself. When I was in my abusive marriage, one of the things that I would do is I would journal a lot. And I'd also do this thing where I would find these quotes on the internet and I would save them in a folder, like these quotes that would kind of speak to me and give me hope and make me feel like it was a friend talking to me because that's all I had. And so suddenly I had like accumulated so much of that. I was like, well, I would see other people putting it on Instagram and I was like, let me do it as well. And at the same time, this may be a way of me kind of, creating some awareness on long-term abuse, domestic abuse, the aftermath of it, which is trauma. And I just started, sharing and posting, not thinking much of it. In 2023, I sort of had a dark night of the soul. And that was the point where all of these trauma responses and coping mechanisms from the abuse that I had brought in with me, it had all collapsed because
Mm.
now it was like, obviously it wasn't serving me, but now it finally kind of showed itself in a way that it was literally destroying my life, my relationships. Because one is people couldn't understand where it was coming from, and I didn't have the complete language for it to make them understand. And so I found myself one week in bed. I couldn't get out of bed. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Recovery is too hard. I keep failing. I've been in therapy for so long. Nothing's getting better. I am a failure. Something's probably wrong with me. I wouldn't eat. And I was just like, I give up. And at the time, I lost a lot of friendships, relationships. People who I expected to show up for me didn't show up for me. And I found myself really alone. And so what did I do? I went back to my page and I started posting from this new place of very deep pain. And the content started to become really raw, messy, unfiltered. And it so happened that people started suddenly responding and they were like, thank you so much for sharing this, or I feel so seen. And the community just started to grow and grow. And today we are at about 130,000 of what I call brave hearts.
Mm.
And it just became a place that was born out of pain. And the people who come there and they engage, they're like, well, thank you so much for seeing me. I feel at home in this place. I feel empowered here. I feel seen here. And I'm like, well, just as much as you feel seen, I don't think you understand that you came to me when I needed you the most.
Mm.
So really that's what Brave and Free is about. And of course, it is also about empowering survivors and in a way what I call being their own brave. So what I mean by that is to sort of, choose what that bravery is for you. It doesn't have to be the brave that is defined by society or by someone else. Brave for somebody may be leaving an abusive marriage. Brave for someone else may be sticking around until it's safe to leave. So it's really, being your own brave, irrespective of what the world is telling you. And that's kind of like um, the overall and overarching theme of Brave and Free is to like, what is it that you need to do to be brave and do it to get to that place that you can call freedom. So yeah.
That's just so amazing and so impactful. You've made such an impact, and yet it came out of your pain and the suffering and your own trauma responses. What do you think your most difficult or persistent trauma response has been that you've had to work through and that you've worked through maybe online in your community?
Um, Definitely. And I think this one is for both of us, fawning.
Okay.
That has definitely been my biggest trauma response. And it was like just this inability to say no to people, to
Mm.
always keep saying, yes, I'll do it. I'll do it. Even if inside it was screaming no, I just go in and just do things that didn't align with my values, that were out of character, um, just to please people, just to feel accepted, just to be in that place where I'm like not rejected, because I
Mm.
couldn't bear that to happen again, or to be punished or to be abused. So I would do whatever it takes. um, to just be accepted. And sometimes when we do certain things, instead of being accepted, it destroys us.
Mhm.
So that's definitely like one of the biggest trauma responses that I've had to work through, and I work through to this day, to be able to like draw boundaries and say no without my system like having alarms blaring everywhere.
I'm still working on that one too. And it's interesting because oftentimes I feel like as survivors, that's what we did. We survived. And so we keep pushing through. We're survivors. I'm fine. I'm doing well. I'm going to heal. And yet all of our relationships are falling apart. And all of
Yeah,
our, it's not really working to just stay in survival mode. So
yeah,
what would you say to a survivor out there who wants to heal? How do they flip the switch of, okay, I don't want to just stay in survivor mode because I
yeah.
am a survivor, yes, and we honor that. But
Yeah.
I want something more. I want that healing, that peace, that self-love that is real, where you're
Mhm.
not trying to get it and you're looking in the mirror and you're saying you're good and you do so many good things, but you actually feel it. You actually come to a place where you feel just relief
Mhm.
from fight of being in
Yeah.
that survivor mode? Like the foundation of what do you think is the most important foundation for a survivor who wants to heal?
To me, it definitely would be having a strong support system. And I know that's something that a lot of survivors don't have. I didn't have it. I know tons of survivors on Brave and Free who say, I feel so alone. But that is the missing piece.
Mhm.
And maybe this message isn't just for survivors, but for anybody listening out there who could be that support system for survivors.
Yes.
Because most of her trauma is interpersonal trauma, right? The pain and the wounds have happened in relationships. And our nervous system needs proof that we are now safe and that history isn't going to repeat itself. And sometimes that doesn't just happen in theory, it needs evidence. And sometimes that evidence is actually going into relationships and friendships, and whether it's peer support or having that therapist that proves that this relationship is safe and the outcome is going to be different. Um, so that's what I would say is to be able to have those support systems in place. And I know that's like a bit of a 360 because we have our friends, our family, the healthcare system, the authorities, we have communities. And sometimes it's also about reaching out to other survivors and getting to know other survivors. And you can go and say, you know what, hey, this is what happened to me, or this is what I'm dealing with. Like, I'm anxious all the time for no reason. And they're like, you know what? Me too. And
Mhm.
suddenly you just feel less alone. You feel less like a broken person. And you're just like, you know what? Thank God you said that. Thank you for saying that because I feel relieved now. And I guess when you co-regulate and you're doing it together, somehow it becomes easier. And somehow you feel like, yeah, you know, I think I can do this. So support system is the foundation in my
Yeah.
books.
And it is in mine too. I feel like it's really hard to heal in a vacuum by yourself, and you don't have to. And co-regulating, it accelerates healing. And when you have other people that believe you, that listen, that understand what you've gone through,
Yeah.
those fears, or like you said, maybe you need to seek out a therapist that's safe. You have to reframe your world as being, oh, there are safe places and people, and I can let go of this narrative that I will always be victimized or that I have to do a certain way in order to not be a victim and not be victimized. And none of us want to feel like a victim, but a lot of times people don't see themselves because they're not the perfect victim. Like they have a
Mhm.
narrative, well, I joined Brave and Free, but I'm not exactly that perfect victim. Or, oh, I joined, Jan Broberg's circle, the survivor circle.
Yeah.
online community that I have, but I'm not
Yeah.
really, I didn't go through what she did or whatever, and so I don't really
Yes.
fit it. Why do we why why don't we just get rid of there being any sort of a perfect victim and a perfect narrative? Let's just feel better.
Yeah.
Let's go somewhere where we have friends and people and peers and understanding and good trauma informed people around us to help us regulate, to help us
Absolutely.
be not alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could never I don't know why that phrase even exists, and why there is so much pressure put on a victim or survivor even to be perfect when we all know that human beings are imperfect people.
Yeah.
And somehow, instead of holding the abuser accountable, we're picking on the nitty-gritties of, "Oh, well, you didn't do that, or you did this while you were trying to survive." Well, of course we did. We were trying to survive. Like, what do people do when they're trying to survive? Are they trying to be pretty while they're trying to survive? Or are they trying to do something nicely and perfectly? No, it's a mess.
Mhm.
Um, and it seems so it seems so logical, but somehow the world has perceived and expects that the person who is going through something and is being harmed has to have it all put together and not make a single mistake. And I think that is so unfair, and it baffles me.
Yeah. It's completely unfair. Because obviously some of the things that maybe we would have learned, we didn't get to. We were
Mhm.
missing from the puzzle. I mean, we didn't get to
Yeah.
fit that piece in because our puzzle was all about surviving. It wasn't like putting the pieces in place one by one, you know? That's not how life went for us. So it is
Yes.
unfair. I agree. I'm always
Yes.
baffled too. Like, gosh. And it's interesting. I think as we talk more about trauma and we talk more about how we interrupt the cycle of trauma, I think more and more people are understanding instead of just going, wow, that person, blah, blah, blah. They're going, I wonder what kind of trauma they're dealing with or what they went through. We're becoming, hopefully, at least I know as survivors, I believe
Mhm.
we are becoming so much more empathetic and understanding because we see it in ourselves as we see it in our peers. And
Yeah.
we understand, well, the reason is not because you're dumb or a bad person or you can't get your life figured out. It's because you haven't dealt with your trauma. It's because we
Mhm.
are in that trauma brain and we're trying to see it and then mitigate it and express
Yeah.
it. And these are the ways that we do mitigate trauma is by
Yeah.
expression. And that's why
Yeah.
our program that we have our 12-step program for trauma recovery is called Time Trauma Interrupted, Mitigated, and
Mhm.
Expressed. It's like you're building a house and you gotta put the foundation down first,
Yes.
and then everything
Yes.
else you can design, you know? But, I really loved this conversation with you, Anna. You're really amazing. You made me cry
Oh.
and laugh and cheer for joy. What's interesting is you have a workbook. My
Mhm.
understanding discovering yourself after abuse,
Yes.
and that supports survivors who are just navigating that identity loss after long-term abuse and those kinds of things. Do
Yes.
you wanna say anything else about that before we wrap up?
I just like to say that it's available for survivors who are listening who would like to get a copy of it. It's basically 10 years of the tools and the work that I put into rebuilding my own identity and rediscovering myself after all those years of abuse. All of those tools, I've put it into a 60-page trauma informed workbook. And if anyone is struggling in that space of who am I after what has happened to me, or how do I know how to become my true authentic self, that is beyond the trauma, I'd love for you to grab a copy of it. And I can definitely share the link to put in the show notes if that helps.
Absolutely, we want all of that
Yes.
in the show notes covering, and I think that's really what it is. I'm hopeful that people will realize that, we it's like a spiral. We're going up, but
Yeah.
it kinda goes down a little, and then it comes back and, it keeps going, and
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
long-term walk, this path,
Yes.
but
Yes, it
if we
is.
don't do it alone, it can be much more enjoyable and accelerated. And you've really shown us that today and talked about so many things. Thank you for your spirit, for your work, for your kindness in the world, in sharing. I really, really appreciate you.
Aw, thank you, Jan. I could say the same goes to you. I appreciate you so much. And you've inspired me incredibly. I don't think I would have ever imagined to be having this conversation with you. So it is such an honor to be sharing this space with you as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, that wraps up our trauma interrupted podcast for today. And go out there, anyone that's listening, and find a cohort, find a person, find find somebody that will be your support, that will understand, that will listen. And if you can't find anybody, come and join us. Join Anna's circle, join her community, join mine, join anywhere, anywhere you can. And let's interrupt this trauma and get it expressed and mitigated and feel better. And thank you again, Anna.
Thank you, Jan.